So much for listening to this episode of Earrings Off. We want to invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. You can find us on Facebook at Earrings Off Podcast and on Instagram at The Earrings Off Podcast.
Welcome to Earrings Off. I'm Lou.
And I'm Teresa. Let's get started. Prepare to be captivated by the insights of Dr. Bo Bennett in this week's episode. With a PhD in social psychology, Dr. Bennett is not just an academic powerhouse, but also a digital entrepreneur managing an impressive array of over a dozen websites. As an author of numerous books, his expertise on critical thinking is unparalleled, and he generously imparts this knowledge through various online courses and during our conversation today. In our discussion, we delve deep into the art of critical thinking and explore the thrilling advancements in AI that are revolutionizing our world. This is more than just an interview. It's a glimpse into the future, an essential conversation that you simply cannot afford to miss. Stay tuned.
Well, we have with us Dr. Bo Bennett, who's joining us today on Earrings Off. Welcome, Dr. Bennett, to Earrings Off.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So talk to us a bit, Doctor, about what is critical thinking and why is it important?
Well, critical thinking is basically, it's a form of thinking about your thinking in a way, kind of like metacognition. It's a way of going beyond the traditional or typical thinking and thinking deeper. So there are cognitive psychologists who refer to it as like level 1 and level 2 thinking. The level 1 thinking being like the fast thinking, the kind of thinking that we do when we decide what cereal to buy. Like, oh, this looks good. When we decide, when we're watching TV and we hear some commercial information, we decide what to buy or what not to buy. We usually use that low-level thinking and we make decisions kind of quickly. Critical thinking takes it the next level. It's much deeper. It's much more deliberate. It's when we have to stop ourselves and kind of take a metaphorical step back and say, okay, this is important. This is a topic of importance. This is something that I need to consider carefully. I need to think about how I'm thinking about this and how to best make a decision. And there are many different areas of critical thinking that can improve your critical thinking, but essentially that's what it is. It's kind of like thinking deeper, thinking about your thinking in order to make a better decision or just to think better in general.
Can you share some of those ways to improve our critical thinking?
Sure. One common way is to understand cognitive biases. So if you're not sure what those are, you never heard of them before, they're basically ways we kind of like hallucinations in a way, but not something we see or smell or taste, but the way we think. They're hallucinations of thought in a sense. They're it's a way that we normally think, like evolutionarily speaking, they're not mistakes because in our ancestral environment, we have to think a certain way. We have to think quickly. We have to make decisions. Otherwise, we wouldn't survive. Our ancestors had to make these very fast decisions that weren't always perfect when it comes to critical thinking, but it caused them to survive. So we kind of carried on those traits. And a lot of those like mistakes that we might be tempted to call it, they're kind of like the cognitive biases. And but in today's environment, it's more important to think critically now that we have reasoning, and a lot of our society is based on reasoning. The rules are based on reasoning. However, our minds are still kind of in that old archaic state where we just want, we want pleasure, we want to survive, and that's kind of where our brains take us. A good example is a confirmation bias. This is one example where we tend to believe information that already confirms what we already believe. So,
Mhm.
like if there's information that supports like our ideology, we'll believe it. It sounds good to us. It makes us feel good to know that it's something that's confirming what we believe. So we'll believe it. Whereas if we get information that goes against like a core belief that we have or an ideology or something, we tend to reject it. Like, no, I don't believe that. That's not true. When that's not reasonable. It's not rational to think that way. To just choose whether to accept or reject information based on how it makes us feel. But that's a good example of the cognitive bias. That's a good example of something that we're kind of stuck with. And in order to overcome those cognitive biases, we need to understand them. And that's just one. There are literally hundreds of them. So it's a good idea to start like looking into them, understanding how our brains actually trick us. And then once you know these cognitive biases and you could understand them, then you realize them about yourself. And then when it comes time to make a decision, you could realize that, okay, I'm biased in this way. I have this cognitive bias. Let's work around that cognitive bias and come to a better decision.
And you referenced different levels of thinking. So, are there factors which impact, I guess, are there factors which impact your ability to get to the next level or explore the next level? Are there factors which might then propel you to think a different way, is what I'm asking, Doctor.
Yes, there are. So you've probably heard before, like for example, if you're tired, you're extremely exhausted or something,
Mhm.
you're not in the best mindset to make good decisions, right?
Mhm.
Or if you're intoxicated, if you're
Mhm.
impaired, then you can't really think very well. So there are a lot of like physical, something that like hormonal, um, having to do with time, what you eat, what you
Mhm.
drink, like a lot of these things that really do affect your ability to think critically. And one is also like it's more about what you're thinking. Let me give you an example of this. This just happened, well, not too long ago, maybe like a year ago, this happened. I was trying to sell something online, right?
Mhm.
And I wanted this thing gone so badly. It was a big piece of furniture from our house,
Mhm.
and it was just like in the way, and I just wanted it gone. And that desire was so strong that I got a chat from somebody on Facebook. I put it on Facebook Marketplace, and it was a total scam. They wanted me to like,
Mhm.
they were going to deposit money in my account,
Mhm.
and it was a fake thing, and they wanted me to send money back to them. And being a critical thinker, somebody who warns people against
Mhm.
this exact type of fraud, I fell for it. Fortunately, I only lost $300,
Mhm.
which in the scheme of things, it wasn't too bad. But I completely fell for this scam. Why? Because I was so motivated to get rid of this thing that I was not thinking clearly. There was no critical thinking involved. I just kind of went along for the ride. And that's kind of what scammers do. I mean, that's what they
Mhm.
try to hit the right buttons
Right.
in order to get you to not think. They try to
Mhm.
scare you. They try to fill you with some kind of emotion. I was already filled with all this emotion on my
Mhm.
own, so I
Right.
didn't need much help from them. But that's one of the main reasons that people can't think critically is because of emotion. Emotion gets in the way quite a bit.
That's helpful. Thank you. Mhm.
What about with teaching children critical thinking? How, all of this sounds, you know, pretty much geared toward adults, right? So
Sure.
far in this
Mhm.
conversation, how and when is a good time to start introducing critical thinking to children?
I would say from the very beginning, as soon as like
Mhm.
everything you do with children, I have two kids of my own. They're now in their mid 20s, but we try to instill critical thinking in them from a very early age, and it worked. I think they're very smart kids, and they're very wise as well in this regard. Uh, it can be a little bit controversial because there's a lot of like fantasy involved in childhood that there are a lot of benefits
Mhm.
for that as well.
Yeah. Mhm.
So it's a matter of finding balance. So, for example, a good story is with Santa Claus. I hope your listeners understand who Santa Claus really is, but I'm
Yeah.
going to go under that assumption. Okay, I don't want any spoiler alerts here,
No,
but
you're good.
okay, good, good. So when our kids were growing up, we did like the whole Santa thing because my
Mhm.
wife and I had
Absolutely.
Santa growing
Yeah.
up. I mean, all
Oh,
kids
yeah.
do, and it's just like a
Yeah.
magical part of childhood, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But clearly, if you foster that kind of thought, if you think, well, that doesn't really lend to critical thinking, does it? Like when like all this fantasy and you talk about like how he gets down and how he sees
Yeah.
everybody at the same time. So our deal was, okay, as soon as the kids start asking questions, we are going to like answer them seriously and kind of like facilitate that. Like, so like if they say, so Daddy, how does he get to all the houses? Well, what do you think? Do you think this is, possible? And then if they ever asked us, like, are you Santa? We would say yes. Like, we're not going to lie to
Yeah.
them. So that was kind of our line. And that's a choice that we made as parents.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, and we're very comfortable with that. Our kids had a wonderful childhood. And I think it was like age 11 or 10 or whenever. So it was a pretty decent age when they kind of gave up that belief. But fostering that kind of creativity and fantasy along with critical thinking is often a challenge. And I think like parents need to know, like they need to kind of talk about like where's the line going to be
Right.
and how
Right.
they're going to
Right.
do that. But you could
Right.
do it. And in school, critical thinking, there aren't classes for critical thinking.
Right.
You probably never seen like a fifth grade critical thinking
Right.
class right after recess, or not even in college, you don't have that.
Right. Right.
uh, I think that's a mistake. I think that there are classes that you can really teach, like focusing on critical thought. However, a popular belief and a popular way that people do things, or most systems do things and universities, is to kind of incorporate critical thinking within classes because critical thinking is part of everything. So you could take
Mhm.
any topic and you could put critical thinking in there and you could foster critical thinking with the students. And I think it takes good teachers, good professors, good parents who are already well versed in critical thought to kind of instill that in their
Mhm.
students or
Mhm.
their children.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. That's some good stuff. So, what does being a humanist mean to you?
That's an interesting question because humanism is it means a different thing to many different people.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And here's another story to go along with this. A while ago, I was kind of like, shopping around. I was very interested in world religions.
Mhm.
And I was like, I grew up Catholic. So I had like those beliefs early on, or I did all the sacraments and stuff. But after eighth grade, I just kind of like left it. It didn't interest me. And I always had a lot of questions. In fact, I
Mhm.
used to get in trouble for asking too many questions. It's one
Mhm.
of those situations where you probably don't want to ask a lot of questions or you don't want to answer them if you're in that position of authority teaching that topic. So, but I was very interested in world religions and looking at all the different religions. And I did study up on a lot of them, understanding like how fascinating they are, and some of them are so beautiful, and some of the thoughts. And it's interesting to be able to take the good parts from each religion and kind of keep the rest. Like you
Mhm.
don't you don't have to get like a package deal. It's like, oh, okay, if I call myself this, then I got to believe in all these different
Mhm.
things.
Right.
And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people
Right.
say, well, I kind of believe in this, but I don't believe in that.
Right.
And but you kind of forced to a lot because the whole thing that we have with the labels. So anyways, humanism was something that I kind of focused on because it was there's no supernatural, there's no like magic involved, but it's really focusing on humanity as the central focus of like what we should care about and what we should kind of put our attention to. But into the humanism, I realized that at least here in the United States, it got very political, which I could understand some of it, but others, it was focusing a little bit too much on politics at the expense of science and
Right.
reason,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's where I had a problem with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at one point I was proud to call myself a humanist, but now I'm like, Again, it's one of those things where I believe in, I like some of the things that they talk about, but the other things, no. So it's basically
Yeah.
it's a more of like a secular, non-supernatural way, like sort of a religion, if you want to call it that, but not really. To look at it, it's more of a philosophy in a sense.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And I mean, I'm not always successful, but I like to believe that I can see beyond labels and just interact with people and meet them where they are.
Mm.
And that's been my goal in interactions with people because you're right, everything can be now, it's so political, people are so divisive, and I just don't I choose not to be a part of that, to see the person and interact with that person.
Well, that's great.
And that's just who I am at this point.
Yeah.
Um, talk to us, Dr. Bennett, about why it's important. Why is it so important to what's so important about uncomfortable ideas?
Well, uncomfortable ideas are basically push our boundaries of critical thinking. There are these topics and these questions that people don't like to ask or they don't like to talk about or think about because they literally push the social boundaries of what we're comfortable talking or thinking about. They may take us in a dangerous area where, okay, we shouldn't be talking about this, or it just feels wrong, you know? So there's controversy around it because there's like one school of thought that says, look, just don't talk about it. There's no reason to explore this. Let's just leave it under the rug and forget about it because the outcome may be like damaging for social cohesion or for whatever reason.
Mhm.
Whereas another school of thought is we should be able to talk about anything. We should be able to explore anything and think about the pros and cons of it, no matter where it takes us, even if it takes us to an uncomfortable position.
Mhm.
That's important to do. So I'm more of that philosophy, but I do certainly understand times and places for things.
Yeah.
Like like if we were at a funeral, for example, we wouldn't talk about like all the terrible things this guy did who we're burying, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I mean, philosophically, it might be a very good conversation to have. Like, okay, this guy was a real
Mhm.
jerk.
Mhm.
But for respect for the situation, for the family, all that, you're like, oh, he was a wonderful man. I'm sorry for your loss. And that's it. You leave it
Yeah.
there. Uh,
Yeah.
but there are plenty of examples of like that, all dealing with all the major topics, politics, religion, and social issues that
Mhm.
that are important. I certainly believe, from a philosophical point of view, to explore in order to get to the best answer, to find
Mhm.
out like how to solve some of these problems.
Right. And I think too, your point about time and place or environment, certainly I know for myself, I can engage in uncomfortable ideas or even uncomfortable discussions, but that depends on the environment I'm in. It doesn't mean I can't do it. It means that I'm trying to read the room it could be for safety concerns. You may not know the people you're interacting with. While I may be rational and able to disagree and have a conversation, I don't know that person well enough to make that type of assessment. So you're
Right.
always looking at the variables when you're talking about engaging in uncomfortable discussions or ideas. So I get
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
No, that's true. And one common example is the whole idea of like platforming somebody. You probably heard of that question. Like, let's say if I were some really controversial figure, which I'm not, by the way, but if
Mhm.
I were, you might make the decision, should we have this guy on or
Mhm.
not? It would
Yeah.
be interesting to talk about what he wants to talk about or with these
Yeah.
topics. However, should we be giving this guy a microphone? Because he's got some dangerous ideas that you may believe are very bad and harmful. So, what good would actually come from that? And that's a
Mhm.
big question. I mean, not just for you, of course, but for
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
virtually any talk show host, any
Right.
news organization, they
Yeah.
have to make this decision. Should we give this person a platform or should we just ignore them? It
Right,
reminds me of like some of the debates that go on. You have somebody wanting to debate somebody else where one person is extremely well known and the other person's not with some crazy ideas. You don't debate that person
right,
because, why? I mean, so,
right.
but you got to make all those decisions on individual basis. You got to weigh the pros and cons. And like you
Absolutely.
mentioned, there's a lot of factors involved. So,
Yeah, yeah. And of course, that weighs into that is the skill of the person who's engaging in these
mm,
conversations, because that's required as well, because
sure.
that can certainly impact, the authenticity of the discussion, the how weighty it can be, and the value that's given to the audience. So
Yeah,
I
you bet.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Dr. Bennett, it's very rare that we have a guest on the show that's so multifaceted, right? So, read in your bio, I mean, you're an author, you do comedy, you're a psychologist and an entrepreneur, right? So it was hard. It was like, what are we going to focus on? So here we are. I'm going to change this subject just a little bit, and it might seem like it's coming out of left field, but
Go for it.
guys, he's prepared to answer these questions. So, how is AI changing our world?
Oh boy, it's changing my world, that's for sure. I think like anybody
Yeah.
who's involved in business uh,
Yeah.
has
Yeah, yeah.
understood that AI is here and it's here to stay too.
Hmm.
So it's this is my perspective, and I want to be clear that if you ask this question to a dozen different people, you're going to get a
Mhm.
dozen different answers. I'm answering it from the perspective of a programmer, pretty much a lifetime career programmer, somebody who works with technology, a business owner, somebody who's created businesses, and also a social psychologist, somebody who understands what it means to be like an individual, what it means to
Mhm.
be a person, what it means to be an intelligence. So it's kind of an interesting, I guess, collective of directions that I'm coming from here. But I would say, first of all, I won't bury the lead. I'm very optimistic about it.
Mhm.
I believe
Okay.
that artificial intelligence is ultimately a very good thing, and it will get better, and it will help us in so many areas. One of the major areas might be with advancing medical attention, medicine in general, being able to come up with formulas, solve diseases and these problems that we've had that we haven't been able to do on our own. So with like an enhanced intelligence in cooperation with humans that know how
Mhm.
to communicate with this AI, we'll be able to come up with solutions that we as humans alone could never have done before. So I think and you just take that one application of the medical industry, and you could just take that same thing and just put it like
Mhm.
with every industry,
Right.
and I think it's
Mhm.
the same thing. Now, on the downside, what this means is a lot of people will be displaced in terms of professional their profession.
Mhm.
AI will take jobs. There's no question. It already has taken
Mhm.
jobs. Um, Quick example, I used to pay somebody on Fiverr about $200 to write a book description for me, and they
Mhm.
would do that, once a week for
Mhm.
me alone. And they don't do that anymore. I upload everything through ChatGPT, and I have some prompts that I set it up with, and within seconds, I get a book description that is far better than I could have ever
Wow.
written or anybody else. Like
Yeah.
after reading the entire book, it's persuasive. It's just like near perfect. And this is just one example
Mhm.
of a description book writer
Right.
who has been
Right.
displaced. So I think that everybody, no matter what you do, you need to think about what you do and what you offer society, like in terms of your work, and think how AI can help you, how it can enhance what you do, how you can use it to do your job better, and also think about, is this something that is going to replace me? And if that's the case, look for something else.
That's good
think
advice. Yeah.
think about how you can um, broaden your skills, your set of skills. And if you don't have any other skills, get one. Start now. It's not going to be the kind of thing where everybody's just going to be losing their jobs like in 1 month, or it's not going to work that way. It's going to happen. I won't say slowly, because I don't want to define that pace, because it could be slow for some people, it could be fast for other people. But I'm going to say it's going to be at a kind of a steady pace. So you're going to be able to see what's coming your way. You're going to be able to see this trend of people in similar positions getting displaced. So you'll have a little bit of notice, and knowing that you're going to, unless you're one of the first ones to get displaced, of course. But yeah, you need to think about what you do. You need to do it better. You need to learn how to use AI to see if it could help you, and maybe be one of those people who use AI to do that job. So, for example, if there are book description writers, to go back to my example, you be that person that uses AI to write book descriptions, and now you could do 20, 30 times more description writing. You're going to charge a lot less, sure,
Right.
but overall you can do a lot better and you could make a lot more money. So that's the kind of thinking you need to do in order to embrace this. And don't get mad at it. Don't fight it. Don't go out and picket Wall Street or DC, or it's not going to work and you're going to lose. You can't stop technology. You can't stop progress. It's coming. So jump on board and do the best you can.
Right. Okay. That's very helpful. Well, Doctor, those are, again, all of the questions that we have for you. Thank you so much for coming on Earrings Off. Do you have any parting words for our audience?
My parting words would be just to check out my website. I've got 2 websites. My business website, archieboy.com, where you could find all I'm doing there. All the businesses, publishing, mostly do with book publishing. And then with my books that I've written on about mostly critical thinking and science and reason, you could find all those at bobennett.com.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us here on Earrings Off. We wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much for having me.